Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Paula Simmons, the Centers for Biological Diversity's Chief Development Officer. Thanks to all of you so much for joining us today in this critical moment for Alaska, which is home to our wildest remaining places in North America, including some that you may have just seen on the screen. And for those of you that got on a couple minutes early, wow, it was a gorgeous set of images showing just the magnificence of Alaska. So right now, Alaska's old growth forests, oceans, wetlands, lakes, and rivers are being put at risk like never before. Today, I'm introducing the Center's Alaska Director, Cooper Freeman, who's prepared to take you across Alaska's vast spaces. Recently, I was fortunate to join Cooper and other members of the Center's team who are fighting to keep Alaska wild. We were together on a trip to view the site of the proposed Johnson Tract gold mine, which is located in an in-holding in Lake Clark National Park. What a place to put a gold mine. And what an eye-opener it was. The waters surrounding this pristine landscape are also a habitat for critically endangered beluga whales, which are sensitive to noise pollution. Cooper's going to share some of how the center is going toe-to-toe with mining, logging, and fossil fuel interests that are racing to desecrate this and other regions of Alaska's wilderness for profit. We'll have time for a few questions at the end, so please go ahead and type any questions you might have into the Q&A box throughout the presentation as they come up for you, and Cooper will answer as many as possible later in the call. Today's call is being recorded, and we'll email the link out as soon as it's available. Thanks again so much to all of you for being on this call today, for joining us, and thanks for all you do to help the Center for Biological Diversity win for the wild. Cooper?
Good morning and good afternoon to all of those who are joining further east. And thanks so much for the introduction, Paula, and to you and your team for putting on this webinar today. It's really a pleasure to have your time. I'm Cooper, the Center's Alaska Director, and I live in the small coastal town of Homer in south central Alaska, about 225 miles just southwest of Anchorage. I think Alaska is a beacon for our country and the world, one of the last places on Earth with true, wild, connected, and intact whole ecosystems, still rich with wildlife, both on lands and in the ocean. But I think, as we all know, everything is on the line right now. And certainly up here in Alaska, we're experiencing the worst attack on our public lands, waters, and wildlife and climate we have ever seen. So today we're going to travel across the state from the Tongass in the south to the Arctic up in the north, onshore and offshore, and talk about what's at stake and what we're doing to protect these places and the vulnerable wildlife that calls them home. We're going to discuss what we're doing to join arms with many partners to fight some of the big fights that you may be more familiar with, from oil development in the Arctic Refuge, the Ambler Road, or protecting Tongass old growth forests. And those campaigns and legal battles are so important, and we'll definitely talk about them and the center's role in those fights. But I do also want to focus on how the center is adding really unique value to the conservation landscape in Alaska and other places and on other issues, perhaps some less widely known. But I think that you'll be really interested in these and how we're filling crucial gaps, advancing novel legal strategies, building new partnerships, especially with Alaska Native tribes, to protect some of our most vulnerable and important wildlife and ecosystems up here. As you know, our organization's mission is to protect imperiled wildlife and the lands, waters, and climate they need to survive. From muskox on the Alaska tundra to Arctic ocean krill. I think this one is probably Euphrasia pacifica for you biogeeks out there. And the beautiful tufted puffins right here in Homer, where I live in Cook Inlet. But we're firmly rooted in the belief that the welfare of human beings is deeply linked to nature and the existence in our world of the vast diversity of wild animals, birds, fish, and plants. And we want those who come after us, of course, to inherit a world that is still alive. And up here in Alaska, we're lucky to have so many of our wildlife relatives still around and present that we get to live really connected lives with. And especially for Alaska Native communities, their cultures and lifeways are still in many ways centered around a subsistence way of life, living off the land and sea, both by choice and really by necessity, while people from around the world travel to Alaska to experience wild nature in a way that you can only experience it in a few remaining places on Earth, whether the Serengeti or in Africa or for example, the rugged southern cone in Patagonia. And here's caribou migrating across the Brooks Range in the Alaskan Arctic. And one of the herds is still over 200,000 animals. So Alaska is a fascinating and inspiring place, and while the threats we face up here are certainly monumental, from roads carving up pristine landscapes to far too many endangered species at greater and greater risk of sliding into extinction, I do hope that you walk away from this with some renewed motivation and perhaps even optimism that we can hold the line and keep Alaska wild. In so many ways, our task up here is just to not mess up what we have so we don't end up like most of the rest of the US, increasingly the world, where our friends and allies are having to work so hard to restore a semblance of what we have up here, these big connected landscapes still inhabited by abundant wildlife with intact native cultures, languages, and lifeways. But we also need to keep pushing forward, and we'll talk about some of our work, not to just hold the line, but to keep advancing the line. After this presentation, as Paula mentioned, I really look forward to your questions, and we'll try to save time for that. Before we travel around to specific areas and campaigns we're working on across the state, I want to orient those who are less familiar with Alaska to the scope and scale of this magical place, and part of what makes it both enthralling and challenging to do conservation work up here. First of all, Alaska is massive. It's 1/5 the size of the lower 48, bigger than Texas, California, and Montana combined. And for us working here, in the morning we might work in South Carolina, in Baja, Mexico, and in the afternoon we work in the equivalent of Oklahoma and Minnesota, bouncing between all the nuances, vast differences between each place. And 65% of the state is federally managed lands, meaning these are America's public lands, amounting to more than 222 million acres. For comparison, the state with the next most federally managed lands is Nevada at 56 million acres. And on this map, nearly all of the colored areas are federal conservation lands in Alaska. Alaska truly has some of our nation's and the world's most impressive public lands. The Western Arctic Reserve, for example, is the size of Indiana, 24 million acres, our nation's largest tract of public lands. The Arctic and Yukon Delta National Wildlife Refuges are both the size of South Carolina, roughly, at 19 million acres each. And the Tongass National Forest, by far our nation's largest national forest, is larger than the size of Virginia at about 17 million acres. And of these 122 million acres, nearly 57 million of them are designated wilderness by Congress, making up more than half of the country's 111 million total acres of wilderness. California's next closest at just 12 million. And Alaska's coasts and oceans are even more impressive. This photo is out of Aleutian Islands with that waterfall pouring into the Bering Sea, part of Alaska Maritime National Wildlife Refuge. And Alaska has more than 50% of the nation's coastline. In other words, Alaska's coastline is more than double the length of the east and west coasts combined. And it's the only state that borders two oceans, the Pacific and the Arctic. And for all these lands and waters, there's only about 700,000 people, about 300,000 of whom live in Anchorage. But despite the state's small population, Alaska Native people have an incredibly strong presence all across the state that we acknowledge. And there's an amazing diversity of Native cultures in Alaska. There's over 20 distinct indigenous languages in the state. About 40% of the nation's federally recognized tribes, 229 in total, are in Alaska. So the biological and cultural diversity up there is remarkable. And protecting all of this is a big task. And so I'm really excited to introduce you to the center's team that's helping hold the line up here. In addition to myself, we have three amazing additional staff here. Rebecca Noblin, our senior attorney, Marley Goska, our staff attorney, and Janet Baring, our legal fellow, and they're all based in Anchorage. And I firmly believe, pound for pound, they're the best and most efficient and effective attorney team in the state, notwithstanding my very strong bias, of course. And We also work really closely with our oceans, climate law, public lands, endangered species, international and carnivore conservation programs, just to name a few. And we get support from our many great from our media and digital team, our government affairs team, our open government team, and our development teams. So, the center is really invested in all of our Alaska work now more than ever, and it's all hands on deck up here. All right, so let's now get going, traveling across the state to talk about just some of the highlights of what we're doing. And this is Alaska. It's obviously a big place, and I want to start. I want to start in the Arctic. First, onshore in the Arctic Refuge in the Western Arctic Reserve, and then offshore in the Beaufort and Chukchi Seas in the Arctic Ocean and the Northern Bering Sea in the North Pacific. So the Western Arctic Reserve, otherwise known as the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska, or NPRA, is our nation's largest tract of public lands, and unsurprisingly by its name, is massively under threat from oil development, including the Willow Project, which many of you may be familiar with, and we fought incredibly valiantly over the last couple of years to stop and reduce, and thanks to the hundreds of thousands of center members and supporters who worked with us to help stop that project and reduce its size. The Western Arctic Reserve is an incredible landscape that is still most intact. And for example, it's home to the Western Arctic caribou herd, which have the longest land migration of any terrestrial species in the world, as well as millions of migratory birds and countless vital wetlands. Here's one of my favorite species found in the Western Arctic Reserve wetlands, the yellow-billed loon, which is an Arctic specialist and quite vulnerable due to climate change. And species we work really hard to protect from oil and gas development. To the east is the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and while much of the refuge is designated wilderness or protected from oil and gas development, 19 million acres in total, the coastal plain area, 1.5 million acres, which is this area in light blue at the top, or light brown at the top of the refuge, in between the top of the Brooks Range here and the Arctic Ocean, has a big bullseye on it from oil drilling. The coastal plain is internationally renowned for its importance to imperiled wildlife. It's the place where the porcupine caribou herd, now Alaska's largest, births their calves every year and is perhaps the most important polar bear denning habitat in all of Alaska's Arctic for the really endangered Chukchi Beaufort Sea population we have here. The perfect combination of a gentle slope, the coastal plain, it comes off the Brooks Range, sloping right down to the coast, just the right wind and snow deposition conditions for these denning polar bears. And here's what those dens look like. Imagine for thousands of years, polar bear mothers have come off the sea ice in the dark of winter into the vast wilderness of the refuge coastal plain. It's quiet and safe. And they dig these dens and have their babies and nurse until spring when they return out to the Arctic Ocean. But now imagine there's a massive oil development there, and instead they find lights and roads and traffic and noise and man camps and oil spills. So what is the center doing to stop these places from becoming massive oil developments? Well, we're part of big campaigns with many organizations in Alaska and across the country, mobilizing our members and supporters to tell our decision makers to keep their hands off of these places. Where the center really adds value is our expertise with the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which are two of our country's strongest environmental laws to protect the imperiled species that call these places home and to protect the habitat they need, which overlaps directly with where they want to drill. So we will often lead sections of legal comment letters, write sections of court filings, provide technical experts for the campaigns. And some of our most important legal victories in these places have turned on our Endangered Species Act claims, and center attorneys have been at the heart of these victories. And those victories wouldn't have been possible without center work to get Endangered Species Act protections for these species in the first place. Nearly all species listed under the Endangered Species Act in the Alaskan Arctic are the result of center petitions. from the historic listing of polar bears to ice seals such as ringed and bearded seals, which we'll talk more about what we're doing to keep these protections in place. We've been able to keep drilling completely out of the Arctic Refuge and contain most of the drilling in the Western Arctic Reserve. We're doing everything we can to fight all that's coming our way right now in these places. But while keeping oil and gas development out of the Arctic onshore ecosystem is so vital and a priority for us, there are a lot of groups working there where there's far fewer attention, but to us is just as important as the offshore ecosystem in the Arctic, where the threat of oil and gas development is really ramping up in the Arctic Ocean, which is home to ecological and cultural keystone species like bowhead whales, where we're leading the legal fight to keep oil and gas out of these environments. They're really still very pristine, unindustrialized. In addition to fighting the only existing leases in federal waters in the Arctic, we expect new offshore leases, the first to be offered in many years in the Arctic, and we're getting prepared to lead the court challenges against any new oil and gas developments anywhere in the Arctic Ocean. But oil and gas development isn't the only thing threatening Arctic marine ecosystems. And I want to talk about some of the key fisheries work we're doing fighting really horrific industrial trawl fishing, and particularly its expansion northwards into Arctic waters. So I want to now head over to the northern Bering Sea of the North Pacific and the Chukchi Sea of the Arctic Ocean in an area called the Bering Straits region. The Bering Sea Aleutian Islands groundfish trawl fishery is the largest fishery in the US. It's the largest food fishery in the world, and it's the second largest fishery overall in the world, second to only the Peruvian anchoveta fishery. It's a $1 billion industrial behemoth, and it's wrecking the Bering Sea ecosystem from its trawl nets scraping the seafloor that are big enough to comfortably fit a 747 jet inside of them to catching millions of tons of forage fish annually that imperiled marine mammals like stellar sea lions and northern fur seals, which are here, that rely on these fish as their key prey species to nurse their young and remain alive in a challenging environment. And their numbers are unsurprisingly all declining overall. And so catching thousands and thousands of tons of bycatch or other non-target fish that are wasted is another huge concern. They're catching king and chum salmon that are experiencing historic declines as well. And make no mistake, this is not a mom and pop fishery. This fleet uses boats over 300 feet long and catch and process everything on board. They're floating factories that remain out at sea for weeks or even months at a time with incredibly long ranges. And the amount of fish they catch in just one trawl is unfathomable. Their main catch is Alaskan pollock, which is shown here. And this is the fish that's nearly every McDonald's and fast food fish sandwich. Currently, the fleet fishes in the southern and eastern Bering Sea in this area, and we are working on some really cutting-edge litigation that we're super excited about that we expect to be launching next year. It has the potential to make a big dent in addressing the harms of the active fishery. We do need to keep the details confidential of that for now, but look out for that in the first half of next year if we're successful. But in the northern Bering Sea and Chukchi Sea, due to extreme climate change with warming waters and melting sea ice, ground fish like pollock are moving north into areas that have never seen trawl fishing, such as the northern Bering Sea here around St. Lawrence Island. And while currently all commercial fishing is banned in US waters in the Arctic Ocean, and the northern Bering Sea is currently protected from trawling, the industry is knocking at the door and has its sights set on these pristine marine ecosystems. Last year, there was an attempt to launch an experimental bottom trawl survey project in collaboration with the trawl industry to provide the foundation to force the federal government to open up this area that had never been trawled before to the trawl fleet. Tribes in the area reached out to us and alerted us to the issue and asked for help, so we sprang into action. And to provide a little bit of biological perspective on this area, as you can see, I'll go back to the map here. The light blue is really shallow seafloor in the northern Bering Sea and Chukchi Sea. And in turn, many of the marine species have co-evolved to feed off the bottom, like spectacled eiders, this bird. And this one is actually tagged by USGS scientists. I love these birds. They're one of my favorite birds. They're Arctic specialists. And the tagging is very cool because we have this amazing data and know that nearly the entire global population of spectacled eiders, after traveling all over the Arctic to nest in the summer, which is what you see here, July 1st, at the beginning of January, returns to ice leads just south of St. Lawrence Island in the winter to feed off the bottom. And there are threatened species listed under the Endangered Species Act. And this is right where they wanted to do the trawl survey that would have scraped the bottom right where these birds, nearly the entire global population, returns to every winter. This also threatens walrus that eat clams out of the mud in the shallow Bering Sea and Chukchi Sea, to bearded seals that feed primarily off the seafloor. And importantly, many of these marine mammals are vital subsistence resources and cultural keystone species for native communities across the Bering Straits region coast. And so we and three tribes in the area filed a notice of intent to sue NOAA Fisheries for engaging in this experimental survey project that was a crowbar to opening up this area to bottom trawling. We, of course, whole-handedly support science, but this was not science for conservation. This was science for industrial extraction. And we focused on Endangered Species Act and Marine Mammal Protection Act issues for a wide range of species, from spectacled eiders to bearded seals and bowhead whales. And I'm thrilled to report that after extensive pressure with our tribal partners, we won. The project was postponed and then canceled only a month later due to the incredible amount of pressure we coordinated and put on the agency. But we don't expect this threat to go away anytime soon. The fish are moving north, and we know the trawl fleet wants all of them. So we are tracking this closely and are really leading the charge to contain the horrible Bering Sea groundfish trawl fisheries, try to reduce the harm there, and not let them move up into the pristine marine ecosystems of the northern Bering Sea and Arctic Ocean. Just before we move off the Bering Sea and Arctic Oceans, I just want to mention all the endangered species we're working to maintain and expand Endangered Species Act protections for, which helps us in turn protect their habitat from extractive development. We were just in court to protect bearded and ring seal critical habitat. This is a seal. Their beards are orange because they feed off the iron-rich bottom there. So that's a telltale sign of a bearded seal. And we are fighting off another attempt by the state of Alaska to shrink and remove critical habitat protections by the federal government for seals to enable easier extractive development off our coast. And we just fought off yet another attempt by the state of Alaska to delist ring seals under the Endangered Species Act to make it easier for yet again oil and gas development to advance across the Arctic. We've petitioned to expand North Pacific right whale habitat under the Endangered Species Act. North Pacific right whales, numbering only 30 to 50, they're one of the most endangered whale populations in the world. And as we learn more, we want to increase their critical habitat. And we've been fighting for over a decade to get ESA protections for walrus, who remain incredibly vulnerable to climate change and melting sea ice, and more. So while we work on all the extractive developments to their habitat, we also work to ensure that they have legal protections they need and deserve, both blocking rollback attempts while expanding their protections driven by new science. Okay, let's go back on land, and I want to talk about two road projects that are threatening to bisect and carve up two of Alaska's most incredible places. Some of you may have heard about the Ambler Road. This would be a 211-mile private haul road for a speculative mining district across the southern Brooks Range here on the other side of the North Slope from the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska, the Western Arctic Reserve. And this is a truly remarkable ecosystem that is completely unroaded and unindustrialized. Again, it's one of our country's last places like this. The road would cut across over 3,000 fish-bearing streams where salmon spawn and cut across the migration route of the Western Arctic caribou herd. That's the herd that's in the Western Arctic Reserve and then comes down south in the winter with the longest terrestrial migration on Earth. Think about this road as Washington, D.C. to Philadelphia, but imagine if that area was largely as it had been for millennia, completely unroaded. That's what we risk losing here. It would cut across the gates of the Arctic National Park and Preserve, and this is a very unpopular project in the region. We're part of the Ambler Road Coalition, have been part of the legal efforts and lawsuits from the beginning, and we had a monumental win last year with the key federal permit for the project overturned after years of legal and campaign work by us and many, many others. Our members submitted tens of thousands of comments to help make this happen, so thank you so much. But now we have to defend that win, and one of our key roles has been to anticipate legal strategies of the current federal administration, connecting the dots and getting out in front of their legal arguments so we can understand and prepare for the nuances and the details. And we've been working closely with the law firm Trustees for Alaska, who are representing us and many other groups on this issue and are preparing for lawsuits to defend against the Ambler Road. And while us and many others defend against the Ambler Road, out at the end of the Alaska Peninsula, at the start of the Aleutian Islands, we are leading the charge to defend Alaska's smallest, but perhaps most biointensive wildlife refuge from yet another devastating road. The Eisenbeck National Wildlife Refuge is home to some of the world's largest eelgrass wetlands, which sequester carbon and feed entire populations of migratory birds, such as black brant and emperor geese, on their way to and from Arctic nesting grounds in the summer. Here's an aerial photo of these incredibly rich, intact eelgrass wetlands. The Eisenbeck Refuge was the first wetland in the United States recognized for its global importance for its irreplaceable migratory bird habitat under the Global Wetland Ramsar Convention, protecting and acknowledging wetlands of global importance. Truly, hundreds of thousands of birds, including nearly every single Pacific black brant, rely on this habitat that is found nowhere else along their annual migration route in this area, as well as birds like the beautiful emperor goose. But the town of King Cove, down here, for years has sought a road across the refuge's narrow isthmus between the Eisenbeck Lagoon, the big lagoon up here on the Bering Sea side, and the Kinsroff Lagoon down here on the Gulf of Alaska side. This is the heart of the refuge and the primary eelgrass beds that were designated by Congress as wilderness to protect them from any disturbance. These are the wetlands that are globally acknowledged under the Ramsar Convention. And this is to make travel to Cold Bay easier for a whole host of reasons. The center has been part of the effort for over 15 years to help protect this truly one-of-a-kind habitat that could have devastating population-level impacts on many of these bird species. The center has been working really hard to put together a historic litigation group to protect the Eisenbeck Refuge under this current road and land exchange decision. Between us as a conservation group and Alaska Native tribes in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta region, just north of the Eisenbeck Refuge, and those tribes have worked for decades to protect these birds because they travel up through Eisenbeck and then onto the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta in the spring and summer where they nest, and then they fly back in the fall, back through the Eisenbeck Refuge, fueling on those rich eelgrass beds. And they're vital subsistence resources and cultural keystones for these native communities. There have never been Alaska Native tribes as co-plaintiffs in litigation to protect the Eisenbeck Refuge before, and the center is humbled to be the attorneys and be representing 3 Alaska Native tribes, the native village of Hooper Bay, Pymute, and Chivak Native Village, to protect this remarkable place. And as a matter of fact, just yesterday, we filed this historic suit. And putting together this tribal litigation group was very challenging, but both and rewarding work. And we're really proud to be working with these tribes to defend Eisenbeck. And we think this is a great example of novel partnerships the center is building with Alaska Native tribes around shared conservation goals. Speaking of lawsuits we filed last week, we're not just protecting birds, caribou, and fish from harm, but also the state's amazing brown bears. Moving over to Western Alaska, these bears are being gunned down out of helicopters by state fish and game agents in an unscientific and outrageous attempt to boost caribou numbers for hunters. Nearly 200 brown and black bears, including 20 cubs, have been killed so far. We're working with our local partners, Alaska Wildlife Alliance, and thanks to the lawyers again at Trustees for Alaska. But we're the only national group taking on this horrific program. No others will step up to the plate. But we felt that we have to fight this. And the state of Alaska, what they're doing is allowing an unlimited number of bears to be killed across this huge 40,000 square mile area on the border of 2 national parks, Lake Clark National Park and Katmai National Park, 2 of the premier bear viewing national parks in the entire world, as well as 2 national wildlife refuges. And they're doing this with no hard scientific evidence that it works to support caribou. The caribou are actually struggling from disease, lack of food, and change-driven habitat changes, nor will this program of bear killing maintain a sustainable population of bears in the region, of course, as required by the state constitution, which is the basis of our lawsuit. Of course, there's so many people, Alaskans and folks from around the world, who love these bears, who watch them and are inspired by them, and for the ecological roles they play in balancing ecosystems. And culling them actually makes our wildlife and landscapes more vulnerable to issues like disease, not less. We need that predator-prey balance. This is the kind of madness that we're dealing with up here, but we have to take it on, and we can't let it slide for our amazing wildlife. All right, I have two more places I want to take you. The first is Cook Inlet, and then we'll end down in Southeast Alaska in the Tongass. Cook Inlet is the water body where most Alaskans live, including myself and Homer, and our biggest city of Anchorage. It's an amazing, rugged place with the biggest tides in the United States, sea ice in the winter, muddy waters all year long, but it's also very industrialized, developed as far as Alaska goes. But there's still a lot of Alaska wildness, and that's what makes it so special. Our primary focus is protecting and helping recover the critically endangered Cook Inlet beluga whale population, which has hovered at around 300 whales for a few decades, a rapid decline in the 1990s, down from about 1,300 whales. Amazingly, you can still see them from the roadside here, as I got to experience with Paula just some weeks or now months ago. We work on three primary issues in Cook Inlet. The first is stopping offshore oil and gas development in the inlet, which is actively trying to ramp up right now. We're fighting the massive climate bomb of the Alaska LNG pipeline, which we are leading the litigation for, but I'm not going to get into those in the interest of time. What I want to focus on is our Johnson Tract mine fight that Paula mentioned. The Johnson Tract mine is a proposed gold mine at the headwaters of the Johnson River inside Lake Clark National Park that would require a haul road, this orange area, through the park itself, an industrial ore shipping port into a bay called Tuxedni Bay on the west side of Cook Inlet. I can't overstate how biologically rich and important this area is. The Silver Salmon Creek bear viewing area down here in Lake Clark National Park at the mouth of the Johnson River, just 12 miles downstream from the proposed mine site, is one of the top bear viewing areas in Alaska and thus the world. This is perhaps the most scenic and pristine area of all of Cook Inlet, really the last remaining unindustrialized place in the whole region. And while at the edge of Lake Clark National Park, it's really one of the hearts of the park. It's truly a national treasure. And Tuxedni Bay itself is part of the Alaska Maritime National Wildlife Refuge. It was first protected in 1909 as one of the country's first wildlife refuges by Teddy Roosevelt for seabirds. It also happens to be the largest seabird nesting colony in all of Cook Inlet. And it's within the designated critical habitat for Cook Inlet belugas. So what the heck are they doing trying to put a useless gold mine here that we don't need? Well, it gets worse. Last year, there was a game-changing study that came out that identified Tuxedni Bay as the first known winter foraging grounds for Cook Inlet belugas. Of course, the whales don't stop eating in the winter, but scientists didn't know where. It's very hard to study the whales in the winter in Cook Inlet with fighting sea ice and really tough, windy, stormy conditions. So what scientists did is they stuck acoustic listening devices in the mud in a few bays on the remote and undeveloped west side of Cook Inlet, across from Anchorage, one of those being Tuxedni Bay. And there were some belugas they heard in the bay, but Tuxedni Bay, which is shown here, this is a photo I took last year, lit up completely. So much so that they only heard belugas feeding in that concentration, most vital summer feeding grounds that they've known about for decades. I truly believe that this mine is the single greatest threat to the recovery and survival of Cook and belugas, and if we lose them, they will not return. Scientists have said that they will not repopulate their habitat. They won't go around the Alaska Peninsula. And the scientists I've spoke with about the acuteness of this threat don't disagree. So stopping this gold mine and protecting this area is one of our priority campaigns, given how spectacular and unique this area is and our focus on the Cook and the beluga whales. So what are we doing? Last year, we filed a petition to create a year-round cook inlet beluga protection zone that would stop all industrial noise and development in the area. This was the first of its kind for cook inlet belugas and one of the first of these kinds of proposals for an endangered marine mammal anywhere. We're also leading the legal fight in court to protect this amazing place. This is the mine exploration camp, and we have filed a lawsuit to stop the expansion of the camp, the airstrip, and a haul road into the underground mine site for advanced exploration. We have multiple other lawsuits that we're working up. It'll take an incredible amount of time and work from everyone on our team, but we're really committed to this. And in this first lawsuit, we're representing our local partners, Cook Inlet Keeper, a native tribe that is fully opposed to the mine, Chickaloo Native Village, and local fishermen. We're co-leading the Johnson Tract Mine campaign with our partners, Cook Inlet Keeper, and we're doing organizing, informing tribes across the region about this mine, and now working with quite a few tribes in the region that are very concerned. And as a matter of fact, I was just over across the inlet with the tribe yesterday. I had about 24 hours notice to make their tribal council, and so I rallied. I had to take a small two-seater plane across the inlet, and that was at the invitation of the council to learn more. Very few people know about this mine, but they're really kind of the people of the beluga over there, and they're very concerned. So we're supporting tribes in a big way to inform them at their request, and then helping them with their advocacy as they wish. And this is a place that we can't lose. Look at how gorgeous it is. And we're fired up on this one and putting in an extraordinary amount of time and energy to make sure this mine never happens. Finally, let's head down to the Tongass. The Tongass is the largest temperate rainforest on Earth. And as I mentioned, it's by far our nation's largest national forest and our nation's largest forest carbon sink. It's globally important for all these reasons. It's also a biodiversity hotspot of endemic species that are found nowhere else, largely due to the island geography that you can see at the bottom of this map. Our main focus here is protecting the Tongass's old growth forests on behalf of old growth dependent wildlife, from Queen Charlotte goshawks to Prince of Wales flying squirrels to Alexander archipelago wolves to all 5 species of salmon. And here you can see the region of the Tongass National Forest, and nearly the entire southeast region is the Tongass National Forest. And on some of these islands are found really the last great remaining old growth stands. The Tongass big, beautiful, ancient old growth trees, Sitka spruce, and yellow and red cedar are under massive threat right now. You may have heard the roadless rule that protects millions of acres of the Tongass and many other national forests across the country, including some of the Tongass's last great ancient old growth stands, is under fire yet again. And then there are many large and small timber sales on the Tongass that are in the pipeline. The first one of this current administration has already happened. Yet despite all of this, I can basically count the attorney team really leading the work on one hand. And I want to give a shout out to our partners down in the Tongass Justice, along with our attorneys, in particular Marley Goska, who's our Tongass lead and timber sale expert in our Public Lands Law Center, that's providing a tremendous amount of attorney support to hold the line in the nation's largest national forest and Earth's largest temperate rainforest. We're seeing smaller timber sales that will still wreck hundreds of acres of old growth trees approved with no transparency or notice that are being cut in weeks. And we've been told that very soon, potentially within the next 2 to 3 weeks, we'll see the first of what we can expect are a run of massive clear-cut old growth logging sales. And this should have all died long ago in the Tongass. There's also an attempt to rewrite the entire Tongass forest plan that guides the direction of the forest and the activities that will happen on it for the next 20 or 30 years. The last complete plan revision was in 1997, and this will almost certainly include a big ramp up of old growth logging. So in addition to turning out hundreds of thousands of comments from our members of supporters against rolling back the roadless rule and weakening protections for our national forests, we are helping hold the line in court to protect Tongass old growth and ensuring that in particular the Tongass's vulnerable wildlife lose no more old growth habitat and actually start to gain it back. They just simply can't afford any more cuts to their habitat. And amongst all this, we are helping to support positive projects on the forest, including restoration projects that can help heal old big clear cuts and broken landscapes. And to solve problems in forest management that tie positive things like Alaska Native cultural harvest for totem poles and canoes that aren't threatening old growth forests and landscapes to timber sale, breaking these really dangerous, problematic ties. That's going to take a lot of work. So while we're fighting so hard for what we have up here, and that's really the plan for the next 3 years, we're keeping our eyes on the future, asking what do we want when we get the opportunity to work with a friendly or a more friendly administration? How do we not just roll into that opportunity and be on our heels, but be ready to push from day one? How do we break through and push the line forward even further to protect these pristine and amazing places and not just play defense all the time? So here's just a few of the things we're planning on getting prepared for, in addition to playing defense and holding the line. We want permanent protections for Alaska's oceans, especially in the Arctic and in other biodiversity hotspots. We have none now. We have no marine sanctuaries, no marine national monuments in Alaska. That needs to change, and we need to make it happen. We need to begin a managed phase down of Alaska's fossil fuel infrastructure, driving a transition to cheaper and cleaner renewable energy, both amongst Alaskans that are on the road system grid between Fairbanks, Anchorage, and Homer, and also for distributed systems in rural communities that can make their lives cleaner and less expensive. We have to do this so we stop fighting over the Arctic Refuge and the Western Arctic Reserve, projects like Alaska LNG and in Cook Inlet, and can start to focus on restoring and rehabilitating these landscapes and keeping places like the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge protected forever. This will be incredibly difficult, but we've already started laying the legal and organizing groundwork for this when the moment is ripe. We want to follow all of the amazing emerging science that is still happening and use that to leverage our wildlife protection laws to protect and grow habitat for endangered species, such as the Cook Inlet Beluga Protection Zone or the North Pacific right whale critical habitat expansion. And we want to continue to strengthen the work between Alaska Native tribes that want to protect their homelands and the subsistence resources that define their cultures, and organizations like ours that see biological and cultural diversity as shared goals. This is with the tribes that we're working in Eisenbeck with, or Cook Inlet against the Johnson Tract mine, or tribes in the Tongass that want to protect and restore old growth forests. And we want to do this with all the wildlife advocates across the state. So, thank you for listening to this. Your support to do all of this work and more is vital, and you are helping fund all of this, from our staff, the experts we need to bring in, the expensive travel to meet face to face with our tribal partners, and so much more. Please feel free to contact Paul and I if you'd like to talk more about our work with us. We'd really love to hear from you and talk more with you. So now I'll turn it over to Paula and our team for questions and answers. So thanks so much. I really appreciate your time.
Wow, what a presentation, Cooper. Thanks so much for that inspirational overview of all the different campaigns you and your team are leading in Alaska to save some of our greatest biodiversity strongholds that are left in North America. Seeing firsthand places like Lake Clark National Reserve up close, it's so shocking when you imagine what could happen to the belugas and the brown bears and the eagles that we viewed making their way through their wild homes. This short-sighted mind can't be allowed to destroy their future. Before we head into the Q&A, I want to echo what you heard from Cooper. We need you, each and every one of you, the amazing people, supporters, and funders who joined this call. We need you with us in this fight. You can see our contact information here. Please do reach out to Cooper, to myself if you're able, if you have questions, if you want to talk with us a little bit more about it. Help the center carry on our relentless defense of Alaska's wildlife and wild places. And at this point, I also just really want to give a very special shout out of thanks to a funder who helped establish our legal team's existence here by funding it and creating a matching program. And we're so, so grateful for that support from this anonymous funder. Our technical assistant, Laura Enriquez, is also putting a link in the chat where you can make a gift if you wish to support our Alaska and Arctic Defense Fund. So now we're going to open up the Q&A, and we're going to start off with a question that someone who couldn't make it today but wrote in sent. So I'm just going to start with that question, and after that, we'll try to take some from the chat. The question is, I've heard that Alaska's U.S. House of Representatives member is trying to roll back and gut the Marine Mammal Protection Act. Is that something that you're working on, Cooper?
Wow, fascinating question. Someone's watching closely. Yes, so it's true. Our Alaska House of Representatives member Nick Begich has proposed an amendment, a series of amendments to the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which is one of the most popular acts the country has ever put in place and protects every single marine mammal from humpback whales to polar bears to walruses from harm. And they want to roll back the key protections in that rule to open areas like the Arctic Ocean to oil and gas development and make it much easier. So we did. We have been really leading the organizing and advocacy against this. At least, certainly at the onset, we were the first alarm system, if you will. We got in touch with some of our Alaska Native relations, colleagues, partners, and let them know about this bill, of course, because many of them rely on these marine mammals and have very close bonds with them and are actually even co-managers of these species. No one knew about this. And that created a huge upswell of concern and pretty immediate opposition. And then we worked with the Marine Mammal Protection Act Defense Coalition, a nationwide group, to put pressure on our representative, and have since been organizing in state op-eds, working with whale watching groups, and a whole bunch of other folks to bring people together and show how unpopular this is. And very recently, the Alaska Federation of Natives, the largest Alaskan Native organization in the state, and thus the U.S., passed a unanimous resolution at their annual convention opposing any rollback of the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And it was an incredibly powerful moment. And so it's been really cool to see Alaska come together and really support the Marine Mammal Protection Act as it was. And we're really proud to have been a big part of that.
Great, interesting. Thank you. Next, we're going to actually, there's two questions here that I think are sort of related. So I'm going to read both of them first, and then hopefully you can sort of combine an answer. I think that should be doable. So from Karen Yarnell, didn't Deb Holland approve this refuge road? Would this be happening anyway? It's a travesty to put a road through wilderness. And then from Linda Harder, why aren't they using a ferry instead of a road for the Eisenbach?
Yeah, these are good questions. The would it be happening anyways? I think I take that to mean if there was a different election outcome. Perhaps, yes. One of the things that we, along with a few others, were really working on was getting these tribes that we're now litigating with in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta to make sure their voices were heard at the highest levels of government. And, many issues in Alaska are complicated, and we do believe that there is a much more viable option to connecting King Cove and Cold Bay, and that's with a marine transportation option. As a matter of fact, Congress required the Department of Interior in 2009 to explore the best option to connect King Cove and Cold Bay, whether a marine ferry or a road. And in 2013, they undertook an incredibly robust environmental impact analysis and found that without a doubt, not only was the ferry safer and more reliable, but a road would irreparably damage the incredible wetlands of Eisenbach, have population level impacts of the birds, and should not be advanced. And there's never been such an effort since then to look at any other option. The road through the Alaska Peninsula out in the Aleutians in the wintertime with snow and wind drifts, and it's not safe. And actually, one of the biologists that I've spoken to who has worked out there for decades said, I'm afraid the road is going to kill more people than it will save by providing transportation access. So, we do understand the needs of people across Alaska to want to increase their connectivity, and we support the ferry. But we, along with our tribal partners, feel very strongly that they're both better alternatives, and we can't lose this habitat.
Yep. Wow. I've got a question from David Fiedler. Can you run down the efforts in Congress to permanently protect Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. How many decades has the attack on this refuge been going on? Does it go back as far as Reagan?
Well, a lot of these protections for these conservation lands started with Jimmy Carter in 1980 under the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act, and which created over 104 million acres of federally conserved lands and refuges, national parks and monuments, and then created wilderness areas. And it did leave a crack open for oil and gas drilling in the Arctic coastal plain. There were compromises that were made, very unfortunate. And we're still struggling to fight back against these compromises that were made that left a lot of room, quite frankly, for future decision making. So we do have a choice in these issues. But yes, the refuge has been a battleground for decades and decades, and it is one of these issues that they only have to win once. We have to win over and over and over again. But I think it's a great question, and it gets to where I ended my talk, which is if we get better, if and when, I do believe when, it gets me up in the morning, get better political conditions, we need to push the ball down the field. We need to pass legislation that protects the Arctic refuge for once and for all. That legislation is in Congress right now. It's been introduced. We need to make it happen so that we can stop fighting over these areas, start rehabilitating some of these areas that have already been drilled, and start phasing down fossil fuels in the state. So yeah, we need to not lose sight of what we can do to increase protections and not just play defense for what we have. It's clearly not enough.
I hear you. Let's move with our questions over to logging of old growth trees in the Tongass. So once Catherine Levin asks, once these old growth trees are logged, it's going to take thousands of years for them to grow back to the stature of the trees that were logged. How do you repair the areas that have been and will be logged?
It's a good question. Well, if we have our way, there will be very, very few areas that will be logged, particularly of these old growth trees. It's interesting you bring up regrowth because Southeast Alaska is much cooler than places like Washington or British Columbia, and the trees do grow even slower down there. So forest regeneration does take a really long time. Fortunately, it's on to the tune of hundreds of years rather than thousands of years, but hundreds of years is plenty of time for these rare endemic species to go extinct. And there are places where the federal government has acknowledged, for example, where the worst of the clear cutting has happened on Prince of Wales Island, that it's foreseeable that the Alexander archipelago wolves, this unique wolf population, could go extinct on the island. So once these areas are clear cut, especially the big clear cuts, they're like nuclear war zones. I mean, it's unbelievable out there. What's really exciting is that there are teams of people down in the Tongass that are working to restore these areas, going out and blowing up culverts, de uh, de basically getting rid of roads and putting structure, woody biomass and structure back into streams so salmon can come back. I mean, and then a lot of, in some places, we probably just need to leave the forest alone. In other places, we may need to go in and thin. The wildlife may not have time to let the forest naturally go through phases that would exclude them. And so, as I mentioned, we are not just fighting old growth logging projects, we are supporting and saying, yes, we want these things down there, and lending the weight of a group like the Center for Biological Diversity that often opposes things to say, we actually support this, has been really helpful to those efforts. And we're really excited to do that. Doesn't mean we don't have critiques and concerns at times. We still take a very careful eye and want things to be done as with biodiversity centered, but there's some exciting work that is happening and we hope can keep happening more and more.
Right on. And just a comment or two. Well, here's one from Linda Harder. Let's add permanent protection for the Tongass and all of old growth. Yeah. And
Amen.
from member Becky Goring, where does Murkowski stand in these fights? And also David Fiedler asked similar question about some of the politicos here. What is the Dunleavy, Murkowski, Stevens political base in Alaska? Is it mostly coming from Anchorage? What's the story there?
Boy, we're going to go way over time if you want to start talking about Alaska politics. But, fortunately, our state government and our congressional delegation are very, very pro-development. Basically yes to everything. And it makes it very difficult. But these are federal public lands. They all Americans have a say in our national parks up here and our national wildlife refuges. And there are so many Alaskans that love these places. On my plane flight across yesterday, I'm sure I was with my pilot. Him and I do not share political points of view. And we were talking about the Johnson Tract mine. He asked me what I was doing. And he said, that place is like Valhalla over there. I'm not even against mining, but that is the dumbest place I've ever heard of putting a dumb 7-year gold mine. And, that's Alaska. We also talked about the Alaska LNG project, and he said, what a waste of money. And he was asking me about tidal energy. I mean, when you cut through the noise and you talk to people across Alaska face to face, you realize that we actually have so much more in common. We have a deep love of this place and we use and experience our lands and wildlife in different ways. I do think that, we can find a lot more common ground than differences in a lot of places. And ultimately, when we do that work well, like I think we're doing on the Johnson Tract mine, I think we can have some really big conservation victories.
Great. Well, we're just pretty much at times. I just want to add one more comment, which I think is lovely to hear from Mike Hillman. Just want to say I work at a bear viewing camp in uh, Chinitna Bay. I'm sorry if I
And in the
pronounced
Bay,
that.
all right.
South of the Johnson Tract mine site. Thank you for all your hard work to fight it.
Very cool.
So
I think I
thank
know where
you
you
very
work.
much. And
Thanks
I'm
for
gonna, sorry, go ahead.
I was saying thank you. I think I know where you work. I really appreciate it. You all been great partners. So
Well, thanks again, Cooper, for everything that you and your awesome team are doing for your inspiring and hopeful presentation. And this work and your unflagging energy are truly an antidote to despair as ominous threats to the wild accelerate. And also just a huge thank you to all of you here who've joined the call today. We're so grateful to have you all at our side. Final reminder, we'll email you a recording of the briefing soon, and we'll also have a transcript of the call available upon request. Thank you again, Cooper. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, team here, for all your wonderful support, and have a great afternoon.
thanks so much.
Thank you.